Great. So I I ended last week. Let's double check that audio going. Yep. Ended last week on introducing first person shooter. You should be able to have gotten the project or created a new empty 3D project and gotten the first person shooter assets over. And I kind of went through each scene. If you remember in file build settings, these are the four main scenes that will comprise the game: intro, win, lose, main. Um, and I ended talking about the UI. I picked the intro scene, and I was talking about how the UI works. And so I'm going to wrap up my conversations about user interfaces, and I'm going to go through intro, and I'm going to go through win and lose as well because they'll probably be about just as sorry sophisticated as intro. And then we'll be left with the main scene, and we do have a secondary scene which I'll pick apart after main scene. But yeah, the main scene is the main part of this project. So let's see, we got a regular main camera. Nothing's too crazy about it. So we had the most complicated part of this happens to be this hierarchy of game objects right here, which is our UI. And if you remember me talking about the UI, you have to start off your hierarchy with a canvas. You have to start off your hierarchy with a canvas, and then you can use any elements you wish underneath that. Sometimes if you have a complicated UI, you might break it up into panels, and each panel will have its own like series of UI elements. But we'll go through all these today and what they all do. And so the canvas sits at the top, and I noticed that they have it on a UI layer. Sometimes when you're searching for game objects, you can either check by name, by tag, or by layer. Layers are also used for physics interactions. Like if you want you don't want like every physics thing in your scene to interact with every other physics thing. It would be way too expensive. You could put them on different layers, and you can say which. I think it's under project settings, physics. Yeah, here's like our interaction matrix. You can say which physics stuff on certain layers are allowed to interact with others to help speed up your processing. So that's one application of layers. And then also rendering. Like if you have multiple cameras in your scene, you can specify which are supposed to be rendered to which cameras. But in any case, those are the purposes of these game object level properties. And then we have a rect transform. Remember, we have regular game objects have a transform, and UI game objects have a rect or a rectangle transform. And that's because UIs play a little differently. They're not objects. Usually, they're not objects sitting out in the 3D space. They're kind of on a rectangle. They're on a flattened 2D space. And so the canvas has some higher level stuff. Sometimes it might have its own raycaster, its own kind of physics raycasting to figure out if you're like it's a you don't need a full on physics system for UI. But the big thing to pay attention to is you have different rendering screen space or world space. Screen space overlay just means render onto the main camera. Overlay it it's almost like a post effect. So we're going to render whatever the main camera sees, and then on top of it, the UI overlay. In this case, there's a huge background image, so kind of over it sits. If anything is rendered behind it, which happens to be this like empty horizon, it'll be obscured because we have a complete rendering, complete image that covers everything. And screen space camera. I know you can say, hey, I just want you to render to a certain camera, not all the cameras. And say if you don't specify a camera, it just acts like an overlay canvas, just overlays on top of the main camera. But you could say, hey, no, I want this other camera to be the target of this UI. And then world space means it'll actually sit out into the world. So usually you'll see that with like the little. So you only see like this little corner sliver sitting here because the main camera is rendering right here. So it actually kind of sits out into the world and gets processed. And the sorry, the UIs that sit on top of like the enemies and stuff, I'll pick apart how like the world space is working with them. But for big UIs, overlays, screen space overlay, and they kind of sit large and off to the side. So usually when you create a canvas, you get this event system along for the ride. So UI interactions in handling like clicks, and is the user trying to click out to the 3D world, or is the user trying to like interact with the UI? It gets rather hairy. So Unity has abstracted a lot of that away from you, and this event system comes along for the ride, and it has this event system component, and it has this input module, so like what the user input is, and what the events are. So think of events as like button clicked, or toggle is being pressed, or sliders being moved, and who's listening to these events. And events are a very important idea, and this little event system just works with the UI. I was interested in just seeing this first selected. So notice when I have the event system, I have all this information like where's my pointer, how quick is it being moved, and is it eligible for a click. So notice I'm like hovering over different, it's saying like where my pointer is entering. So there's a text title, a vignette, which is the cornering, and when I'm clicking, it's saying eligible for a click. And I just have to move this whole thing up. But you can see it's processing a lot of stuff, and that's great because it's hidden away from you. You don't really need to know what's happening. You just kind of want to see when I click on something. Okay, pointer press, last pointer press. Awesome. I've never actually sat here and kind of looked at, because you can just ignore it. The point is when you click on all these UI elements, and you'll see like you don't have to write code for it. There's like this really nice inspector-based workflow dealing with UI elements. And I was just wondering what the event system is dealing. So the event system is just handling all these UI events, where the mouse is, should something be clicked, or and we're going to learn more events. I'll talk about them as we hover over, or as you talk about each UI element. But this is the event system that is specific for the UI. This menu navigation, I looked at the code, and it's kind of, to me, it's not really doing much, so I'm going to skip it. It seems to be a bit, sometimes I talked about over engineering. You don't really need to know what this is doing, because the event system is kind of handling that for you. So I'm going to ignore that. So let's go into Canvas. Okay, background image, this big outer space image. We have a rect transform. Remember, we had stretch and anchors. Now, usually the best practice is to use anchors, because usually your UI elements are not filling up the entire screen. But when your UI element fills up the entire screen, or it's meant to fill up the entire like width, say like it's meant to be like a nav bar along the top, or something you want to always be stretched along the width, then you can stretch it widthwise. Or if it's meant to be like a vertical bar, it's always meant to be stretched like horizontally, you can stretch it horizontally. But these are for elements that are meant to fill up the entire screen, or one dimension of the screen. Most of the time you'll be doing anchors, because you need to anchor little buttons and text elements and what have you. So anchors and stretching. And where do you want it positioned? But since this element takes up the whole screen, it's centered right at the center, 0, 0, 0, and we just stretch it over the entire camera. And it's a raw image as opposed to just a regular image. And so I'm trying to. Okay, color overlay does something. I don't really care the difference between raw image and regular UI image. I always use regular UI images for whatever reason. You want to use raw image. Okay, it offers more options for animating the image and accurately filling the control rectangle. It doesn't need to be a sprite. I bet you maybe that's why. No, it's a sprite. Oh well. Doesn't matter why they chose it. It looks like there's no animation or it's a sprite. So it sounds like it could be just a regular image. So let me click on vignette and we see that we have just a regular image component. So under game object UI, here we have raw image, here we have image. This is the one I'm more familiar with. You just drag and drop either a sprite or just a regular default image here. You can put some overlay, color, or transparency if you wish. Raycast target's kind of interesting. This means is it clickable? Now, actually, technically, this is just an image, and this is just a vignette, the darkening of the edges. So it's actually not a raycast target. And I think maskable is necessary. No, it doesn't seem to be changing that much. Usually, it's an overlay, it's a mask. But raycast target like these are just images. They shouldn't be targets. It's kind of a waste of processing because they don't do anything. When you're scaling them and stuff, if you're not doing a stretch, they don't fit right. You could you can mess around with their aspect ratio with the rect transform. The image doesn't have to sit perfectly. Sometimes you do want to stretch it. So title text. This one that was this is a text mesh pro text. Okay, so here we have text in the default legacy. Yeah, so these are the legacy ones, text button drop downs using basic Unity text, in which they've kind of deprecated. But if you did need to use them, they're there. But here we have text mesh pro, and I just saw a comment. Yeah, so the camera is just sitting down in world space. Why are my icons not showing? One second. Okay. This is my camera, my world camera, looking out into the world. This is the frustum, the perspective cone looking out. It actually isn't seeing the UI. I can actually rotate this thing and have it. It's like looking right at this massive UI billboard. And notice in the main camera view, it doesn't see it. All right. So if I go to canvas, screen space, world space, I say, yes, this is an actor out in the world, like UI canvases. Notice now the camera sees the UI, but it's super big and it's off to the side and it doesn't make sense. It almost looks like a big wall of a building. It's not meant to be like a 3D actor in the world. It can be, and I'll show you in it, like little UI elements sit over like the enemy agents. But a screen space overlay just means after the camera renders everything in the screen, in the world, all the 3D stuff is rendered. After everything is done, we overlay the additional stuff. We overlay our 2D stuff. It's a post-process composite. So we see in the scene view, we don't see it, but in the game view, we do. And that was interesting. I just saw the stretching wasn't working. So anyway, before I get back into the stretching, it's called a screen space overlay. It's meaning it doesn't sit in the world. The camera doesn't render it in a normal way. It renders it as an overlay. For that frame, after it renders everything out in the 3D world, hey, what is left? Are there any overlays, any UI elements, any flat 2D elements which should be overlaid on top of everything? And that's these UI elements. So it centers up in the camera in that it's an overlay. it's like it sits in the camera space, the screen space. It doesn't sit out in the world. So in that sense, it's not the camera aligning to the UI. It's like the UI aligning to the camera. It sits in the camera space. But let me go back to that background image, and instead of stretch, let me just have it centered up in the world, and just like mess around with the width. Let me go into game view, and see now like I'm manually setting the width and height of this image. In fact, if I go negative, I thought it would flip. It doesn't. But now it's not stretching to be an overlay over the entire camera view. So you see that it's being placed on top of. Overlay might be easier if I hide this, to be like, look out into the world, render all your 3D objects, all your game objects, your game world, and then overlay the UI on top of everything. With the buttons, it might make more sense. So if I bring back the background image, you see I can mess with the width and the height and the position. This is rect transform. Position X, Y, width, height. Wonderful. You could, whatever, if you wanted to, whatever, you could rotate stuff, if that made sense. Usually doesn't make sense in a 2D way. Usually rotation on Z might make sense because it's facing the camera. But ultimately, if you go back and say, sometimes there's a set native size. Okay. So like the image, the background image, you see the raw image size is the actual like asset, the file is at 1920 by 1080. When you say, hey, just set it to your native, notice the width and the height got updated. And it's too big. It's too big for what the camera view doesn't see it. If I set the camera view to 16 by 9 or 1920, it's still like oversized for the camera. Let me go back to free aspect because it's easier to see how the UI gets messed up. Now, that's why you might not want to do the native size. You might want to say, hey, let's just stretch it. All right. Whatever the camera space is, just stretch the image to fill it. Now, all these numbers are all weird and everything. So you can just go in here and say, hey, let's just reset it. And I want that width and height like that. So let me go back to stretch. And let me just zero these out. Okay. And so when they're all zeroed out, it's like saying, do not offset it. Offset it 0 pixels. So from the left, you could say, okay, offset it 20 pixels or whatever. And from the top, you can, so if you wanted some like little offsets to the stretching. I just want zeros. I just want this whole thing. To just be 0, meaning don't like offset it from the camera's edges. So it's a little weird with the top. Okay, there we go. So now it's just stretch, it's filling. Okay, stretching, anchoring, and now you have like movement controls. Not as a stretch, you have left, top, right, bottom. Notice with anchoring, you have positions and width and height. So it's a little different of a system. These are all like nice features of the rect transform. All right, and then the vignette is just a regular image, and node array casting. Oh, here with the regular, I was looking for stuff like this, preserve aspect ratio. So you get used to like the asset that you're messing with might have a different aspect ratio than your camera space and camera aspect ratio. All right, so title text. Text Mesh Pro, it's a text component. Notice all these UI components have the same thing. They have a rect transform, they have a canvas renderer, and then they have this main like component, whatever it is. Image, here it's text, Mesh Pro, and I remember this was you can write whatever title you want to here. You can change the font. Usually you have to download it. The fonts are going to be like external files that you can find a lot for free. You just download them and put them into your project, and you can select them. Font style. Yeah, it is just very much like word processing. Alignment, wrapping, overflow. You mess around with these. I don't really mess around with, you know, I mean, you have even more complicated stuff. Oh, like if you want like an outline color in the face, the center color, it gets really crazy. You have overlays, lighting, glows. You know, you could get really, that's why Text Mesh Pro is now the default. There's just a lot to mess around with. But ultimately, it's like a component that is text, not interactive. Images, not interactive. Okay, now we have our two buttons. So game object UI, we have the button here. Looks like this is using the legacy button. Either way, they're going to function the same. It's just how is their text being presented. Let me jump down. Let me take a look. No, it is Text Mesh Pro. All right. So, start button. Notice a button has two game objects nested on each other. So this is a button. It's pinned to the bottom. It's this big button that says play. You can mess with the width and the height if you care to. Now, what happens is we have an image component because we have the render parts of it. So you can change the color of it, and you can see what the main color is. But if I click play, underneath here we have this button component, and then we have our different colors here: normal, highlighted, pressed, and what have you. So if I hover over it, see we have normal, highlighted, selected, pressed. So notice as I move my mouse over, it's kind of, let me move it back to the default color. It's supposed to be a white. Okay. So the default, the normal color here is white. Highlighted is this blue. That means your mouse is over it. And you can mess with this color if you care to. This one has yellow, but you usually want a consistency. But anyway. And pressed. So when I press it, it might be, yeah, I click it and it's that gray color you see there, right? It's just taking a while to load up the next screen. But here I'm in main screen. I'm going to unclick play and go back. So anyway, this is main color. You should probably just leave that alone. You do want it to be a raycast target because buttons are interactable. You could like slap an image on in the background if you wanted some like textured background or something. But notice here's a button component. It is interactable. This is turned on, and you have other transitions you could do, swiping out sprites or animating like making it look like it's bouncing and stuff. But the color tint is the basic one, and here's the different color tints. How quickly, what's the fade duration between these different state transition colors. And what's really important is on interactable UIs, you'll have this little like GUI thing here. And this is really important. And this is just an additional script. So it's like when the user clicks play, let me clear this out. It says list is empty. I'm going to click play. And I'm going to click, notice the play button shows it's highlighted, and I click, and it's turning gray at like it's activated, it's being pressed. And I click off it, and it's not pressed, and I'm not highlighting it anymore, right? So I'm clicking the button, but it's not doing anything. All right. So that's what this on click is for. It needs to run a script. And so this is part of the event system. So it's, as I said, it's like hairy code to deal with events and UIs. And so it's been abstracted away from you. Now for each interactive UI element, you just have this little GUI you got to deal with. So on click is a method that'll be run when you click on this button. This is the event that will be called when the user clicks on the button. So you don't want to always be checking. So you don't want like an update loop saying, yeah, like a little script on the button that's got like an update loop says, and there's like checking for user input. Did the user press? Did the user press? Oh, if they pressed, did the user click the left mouse button, and was the mouse position like within the boundary of this button? And if it is, what code are we supposed to run? So the button code's a little more complicated. It's always watching the mouse position, and once the mouse position gets over the button, it's saying, hey, the user has highlighted the button. So let's do like a little animation to change the colors. Did the mouse go off? Was the mouse over the mouse button when the left mouse button was clicked? So all that is being like, forget it. That's like a lot of overhead for somebody to think about just to create a button. So let's do it for them, and then we'll kick off an event. You don't need to sit there and like check the update method and check for user input. All you have to do is like register to this event saying, hey, when this button is clicked, we're going to fire off an event. And when we fire off an event, we're going to call any method that is listening to the event. So these are called event subscribers or event listeners. So there's an event generator, which is this button component. And when the user actually clicks within the space of that button, it says, hey, who's subscribing to this event? Who is listening to this event? Who, meaning which object has given up a method call to be registered to this event. And for each one, you could have multiple. So I could click plus, and you could have many methods on many different component objects being called. They are all event listeners. They're all event subscribers. But I'm like, okay, I just want one, right? And only during runtime, when the user clicks here, do I want this method called. And it's like saying, okay, great. Now where is this public method should onClick be called? I mean, it has to be public because onClick is another part of another object calling in. So it's saying like, okay, who owns this public object, this public method you want me to call? And that's where this none, which game object. So it depends where you want your component object to be, which game object you want to drag it on. It so happens to be here. This is the component object that contains the public method that we will run, that we will call when the user clicks the button. So all we have to do is drag the start button back here. And we're saying, okay, we want to check component objects that are on the start button game object. And I click here and I say, all right, which one is it? Is this public method on the game object? No, but just a note, there is some public methods on the game object you can call. Is it on the rect transform component? No, but there is stuff if you needed to call stuff. Canvas renderer? Nope, same deal. The image component? Nope, but there is public methods. The button component itself? No, good, but that's where we're coming from. But the load scene button component object, which is a C# script, sending this project. Yes, this is it. And I just so happen to know that it's this load target scene, so I'm going to click that. But notice it's like saying, okay, we're going to go to this component object sitting on this game object, and we're going to call the load scene button method. And it better be public because we're coming in from another object. So if I open this up, this is the first script, by the way, that we're opening up in the first-person shooter game project. And so we have some using statements. They all seem to be white, so we're using these all. This is Unity engine, which we know that we're always using. It's this model behavior here that's coming in from it. We're using unity.firstpersonshooter.game. So this is a namespace that the Unity developer broke their scripts up into. And so if you go down to scripts here, we have AI, editor, game, gameplay, UI. There seems to be stuff underneath here too. So this is like saying, hey, there's some script in the game fps.game, so it's going to be here. They just did this name convention under Unity, under first-person shooter, because I guess Unity owns this first-person shooter project. We're going to go into the game namespace, which is going to be the just we know that there's going to be scripts here that have that same namespace. Unity Engine we went over. Now Unity Engine.event systems. This is a new one, and this deals with event systems. This deals with the event system component object that I showed you that dealt with the UI. Scene management. This is going to deal with loading and unloading of scenes and stuff like that. And this script, load scene button, happens to be under unity.firstpersonshooter.ui. So if we go into UI here, there's load scene button. So this is, they just dragged it on here. All right, so public class load scene button. We have a public string. So there's a property, it's public. Anyone can set it. It's called scene name, and it's just an empty string. All right. Now we have on update. So if event system current blah 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 and this button, then we're gonna run this. So it looks like they had this whole menu navigation thing right here that I said it isn't doing anything. I think they had built. It looks like they basically built their own implementation of the event system, and maybe Unity or somebody told them, "Stop! We want you to use ours. Don't do like a custom stuff. Don't show off." So basically, you can ignore this. Basically, what we're doing is we're just calling this. This method is public. Anyone can call it. So our UI button event can call it. It's called load target scene. And what does it do? We just run this thing, and it doesn't receive any input. And so it goes to Unity Engine.scene manager. So Unity Engine, sorry, .scene management .scene manager. So that's this namespace. And it calls this method load scene. And you can see that it's overloaded. There's different inputs that you can pass to it. But in this case, we're just passing the string, the name of the scene, which by default is empty. But when you call load scene, you better have the scenes that are, you either have to reference these by name, and they better be up here in your build, or you reference them by number in this array. So it's in order that they're dragged in. So array of 0, 1, 2, 3, size of 4. And what do you want to load in? So either by array index or by the actual name of the scene. And it looks like so what they did was they typed in, so this was public, and you just basically have to go into the inspector and type in the name of the scene here. So if you go into scenes, here's our 5 scenes, and this one isn't part of our build settings, but it'll load up this one called main scene. And so since this was an empty string, but it was a public string, we typed it out in the inspector here. This will get filled out, and then we just run this, and then it's going to say, hey, load scene. And since this string was filled out as main scene, it's going to load up main scene. All right. So this is exposed out. You just edit this, and then you say when the button gets clicked, you're going to call load target scene, which is this method. All right. So on click, it's an event, and it's fired by the button. And we say, all right, when this event gets fired, who's listening? Whose code should we roll? So we registered this method, this public method, as a listener. And So it just runs this code when the button is called. That's all it means to be a subscriber to an event. And then that means unload everything here and load up everything that's in main scene. Now the last part of the button that I didn't cover is that underneath is another game object. And it just sits in the dead center of the button that you built. And it's just a text element. So you can call it whatever you want. And you can do whatever settings you want on that text. All right, that's the start button. Let me know if there's any questions. Control button, this one here. It is a button. So positioning, it's the image part. Here's the button part. And what are we calling? It's going to call this component object. And it's going to call set game object active. All right, so here's the script. What does this know about? Okay, objects to toggle. Notice that this is sitting here and it's turned off. And this is just game object set active or active, and you can just turn it on and off. And this is all the UI is doing. All right. It looks like there's a little close button underneath there. This little X is a close button, so I have to cover that. Okay. So that's the controls image, which is turned off. And so toggle game object. So we have a public property of type game object. What are we turning on and off? And a bool reset selection after click. So take a look at what that does. So again, ignore the update. Look like they tried to do their own event system. Set game object active. And a bool comes in. So how are they setting the bool? Oh, it's this right here. Okay. So they're saying, hey, this is a method, public method, and it expects a bool. Usually with buttons, the event is a click, like an action. Something just happened, and there's no other data other than that. So usually you just call methods that don't receive input, because a button click doesn't have any other input with it, like a slider or something has a number associated with it. But a button click's just, okay, call this method. So normally you call methods that have no input. But when there is input, then you have this little like secondary thing here, like, okay, I'm going to call this method. Sorry. It's saying, what do you want me to toggle this bool input to? Do you want it to be true or false? True or false? So we're just saying true. Yeah, hold on one second. Just gotta mute myself. I did see there's a question, but let me just follow this. So call this method with the input bool of true. So call this method, it's public, and set this input bool active to true. So that means whatever this object to toggle is, this game object, call set active on that game object and activate or deactivate it based on the bool. And the bool coming in is true. Which, all right. Maybe they wanted to make it kind of a little bit universal, and maybe there's some situations where you do want to toggle it to off instead of on, but maybe they tried to make it more generic, and that's why there's this bool coming in as opposed to just always setting it to true. And then if reset selection, I mean, that's going into the event system. It's saying, hey, whatever we have clicked on, we have nothing clicked on now. Again, this is probably making it more generic. It makes it a little confusing right now because why are they doing this? And it doesn't really do anything right now. But I think they're just trying to make their code more generic, which is usually useful, but again, can be confusing at times when it's not necessary. I'll stop for a second. So the built-in function can already detect input. The built-in function. So when you mean built-in function, Yeah, like this event system was made by Unity. This thing can detect user input. If that's what you're asking. So this stuff manages all your user input for UI, and it's been abstracted away from you. The scene getting button pressed. So that's the start button here. So when this start button gets pushed, this hit me, it's going to call this load scene button here. Oh, you mean like this, like the user trying to? Yeah, but they're already managing user input. I guess you're talking about this code here, which I told you to ignore. This is like the developer trying to manage their own event system, but they're still using the event system. They're just trying to get a little bit more, learn like manipulating it themselves. They're not letting the event system just do its own thing. So I said just ignore this for now, if that's what you meant. So controls button. So when you click it, what it's doing, it's saying, okay, this is the game object that I know about. And when a user clicks it, set it true, set it active with true. And so it looks like this. So that's all that script is doing. Now this thing just has an image. That's what this big controls image is. And it shouldn't be a raycast target. It's not interactable, and it's just stretched to fit the screen. And underneath it, or next to it, I guess you could say, is a close button. So it's pinned up here, this little X. And in this case, this button does have an image. It has this little X image. Oh, it's just white. Oh, I don't know why they needed to. It's just a white background, and then they put this image underneath it, which is this close button icon, this X. So technically, they didn't really need to put the source image. It's just a white little square. But in either case, it's a white square. It's great. It's a button. When you click it, it's going to call this script, and it's going to call set game object active with a bool, and the bool's turned off. So it's basically the same script. It's just turning this controls image off. It's referencing the same game object. It's just passing in a false here and turning this false. So it's using the same. You actually didn't even need this script here. You could just call this script because they're managing the same game object. You just whether you're passing in a true or false. So they made their script generic to handle this situation, and they didn't even reuse the same script. But either case. All right, and so when you click that X button, this closes out. All right, that wraps up the intro screen scene. I'm going to go to the win scene unless there's any questions. All right. The win scene is okay. It's the exact same thing, but they use the. This is good. They like reuse the whole thing, and now like this text element that was empty just says you win. And in this case, they reused the menu button. Doesn't pop up the control image. What it does is it uses the load screen button script, but now we're loading in the intro menu. Right, so it's just calling this here. Just calling this here, and we're opening the intro menu, which goes back to intro. So if we click menu, and then they reuse the play again. That's this reset button. Let me just double check. Yeah, so okay, so the menu button goes back to the intro, and then the reset button is this play again, and that one just goes back into main. So this instead of play, they just type play again. It still loads up the main scene. All right, and so the lose is probably just as quick to review. Yeah, it's exactly the same, except the text says you lose. So it's either we go back to intro, or we go into main. So that's pretty easy. Any questions before we go into main scene? Let me just say that there are other UI elements like toggles and sliders and drop downs that are very useful. And so if I just make a slider real quick, this is the slider. And the slider, you can set the min value, the max value, the far left and far right, and what you're defaulting to, say a half a unit. And then when you call stuff on value changed, you're still saying which public method should you be calling, but it needs to receive a float because as you move the slider, it's sending this number. So like every little change, you're like calling so many events. It's crazy. So like this moving this back and forth, it's like probably calling like hundreds of events because this is being checked every frame. All right. And so there's more complicated UI stuff like toggles, which is just on off sliders, drop downs like choosing a menu, so an enumeration. Cool. Main scene. All right, so this is where we're basically going to be spending the rest of our class. Well, a few weeks, definitely until the quiz, because there's a lot going on here. So, about 30 minutes. So we have these spacer objects. Like they don't do anything. They're empty. There's nothing underneath them. There's no other components, and they've got these like big dashes things. So they're really useful for just spacing out. So this is all your general stuff. This is the player stuff. This is the enemies. This is the pitch, the paths, the pickups, the level stuff. All right. It looks like we have these little color. I don't know if these are like color tabs or something. This might be with the new Unity. I haven't really seen these before. It looks like they're just designating what are prefabs, what are game objects. Like instead of just this cube, also there's yeah. All right. I thought it was something a little bit more special, like a way to like layer, organize stuff. All right. So I want to look at, since we were just talking about the UIs, I just want to peek around. So players, enemy, pickups, the level itself. Under game, okay, here we go. Under game manager, we have game HUD. So if I turn this on and off, that's all this screen space UI. So we have a lot of scripts sitting on the top. That's a lot. Wow. And there's probably like no. Oh, there is. Okay, there is a HUD. I thought maybe everything was just generated at runtime, but cool. At least we have some stuff here. So you notice that there's the rec transform. So this means heads up display, and then we have screen space overlay. And I'm just gonna. What are these feedback flashes? Okay, these are screen space as well. So this is me when you get hit or something, and it just does a flash. I'm just seeing if something's turned off with them. All right. Let's see how they're flashing when we click play. So this is a little bit easier to understand. So here's our game level down here. Right, all the 3D objects, everything, and notice that we zoom way up, and here's the UI's screen space. It's like way off to the side. It doesn't get rendered at with all this 3D stuff all the way at the end. It overlays stuff on top. So in the HUD, okay, there's no scripts. Good. So we have like things are going to be broken down. So we have weapon, which I guess we don't have a weapon picked up, but we have the little crosshair here. You have the compass up top here. Notifications. I guess that these, when you'll notice when we play, I'll play a little bit. There'll be like these little like goals and stuff. So you have notifications, objectives, display messages, bottom left corner. So like your ammo and your health, and pause menu. Which looks empty, so it must generate. Oh, okay, tab. It's just it's this whole thing up here. Okay, it's just pause. It's this top left frame rate counter. Okay, this is for debugging. If you want to see how your frame rate's doing. And if I click play, so here's that weapon HUD manager that gets created. When you grab a weapon, you can see the crosshair kind of changed. We have the compass is updating with enemy dots. And so here we have, let's see if these are objectives. Okay, so these are objectives. When you see a clone like this was a prefab that was created at runtime. This didn't exist when we were in not play mode, just normal. Nothing was here. This got created. So it looks like they throw objectives in as the runtime changes, the situation changes. But notice we have a vertical layout group at the top of the objectives. So this does a lot of your. So when you get more objectives, you're just gonna like sit in a vertical column nicely, and that's all done with this right here. Cool. So I don't know. There's a lot of scripts going on in the UI. I'll probably hit the UI as like some of the parts of it as we just like look at how the game starts up. I don't really anticipate. I just want to see how the crosshair changes real quick, just because I notice it's just this little. I don't know why I call it a V, but it's a crosshair. Okay, this eliminate. Oh, I'm going to pause it real quick. That must have been a notification. Let's pause it. No, must be a display message. Yeah. Okay, there's the clone. Interesting. Yeah, eliminate all enemies. This is it. Maybe because I'm in pause. It's not turning on. Okay, yeah, that's it. Cool. The crosshair. Okay, it just changes the graphic. We went from that little cross. It's just a little icon, a little image with transparency. Cool. Okay. And when you hit tab, let me just see how this pause menu comes up. In-game menu. Yeah. So here, this in-game had a canvas. It's got a background, a menu panel. So this menu panel is this thing here. It's got the title, pause options. Now it has an inner panel set up with has a grid layout. So notice that these are all nicely like laid out. So it's using this. Remember I was saying that panels are useful ways to organize your content. And so when you have more complicated or lists of stuff to show off, panels are sometimes helpful. So if I open up, now we have sensitivity and shadows. And so here's a slider. This is all using, seems to be like the legacy stuff, this slider, but no, it's no text. Never mind. Interesting that I was telling you how that slider works with look sensitivity and nothing's listening to it. So I don't know if this is working or if they're connecting it up in some other way. Let me just check shadows real quick. So here's a toggle on off. It says check. Yeah, you're not connected to anything. But I bet you still work unless, let me see. Oh yeah, you do work. That's super slow. Shadows. I don't see the shadows working, but the look sensitivity definitely is working. Invincibility, let's try that. Oh yeah, that works. Frame rate counter, 100 frames a second. It's nice. Controls, and take a screenshot. That's interesting. I'm supposed to save an image out. I'm going to save it into downloads or something. Cool. So even though, okay, so here's a whole in-game canvas. It is just being turned on and off. There must be some like master script. Okay, here you go. In-game menu manager, and here's take a screenshot. Okay, so on start, it's just going out and finding game objects and finding components. And on update, if the user presses the escape key, lock cursor, I'm clicking outside the menu. Okay. Okay, on mouse sensitivity changed. So when I move that slider, it's going into the player input and the look sensitivity. It's updating that. So this must be a script on the player game object. I just want to see how this toggle. You can always click on these references, like who is calling this method. I'm trying to see how that slider, that look sensitivity slider, how it's ultimately calling this. Oh, on value changed. Okay. Okay, so on start, it's just doing it by code. So this is saying like on value changed on this event, add a listener. So instead of you dragging, so it's like the same thing of like saying, oh, okay, there's a public method on this. Whenever this sensitivity slider, whenever the slider changes numbers here, it's like saying go here and go into this and call no, it's not public. But if they made this on mouse, since they didn't have to make it public because they're calling it from within their script here. But if this was public, you could assign it. But you could also, it's interesting that usually we're advanced programmers. They don't want to do manual stuff. They don't want to mess around with GUIs because it takes time or too much time. So what they'll do is they'll do everything by code. So remember, everything that's in the software that's like exposed in the GUI is actually just running code behind the scenes. And when you understand it more, you could just call the code directly, but the whole UI system is meant to be more approachable for beginners. So you do like your own manual work. You don't do it by code, but this programmer did it. So this slider on value changes its event that I showed you, and then add listener is a method that you say, okay, which methods will be called when this slider updates. So they just connected up all their interactive UI elements. They just did it with code. Cool. I'm going to take a quick look at, take a screenshot, because this isn't normal game programming, and it probably doesn't have much to do, but it's interesting how I'm pretty sure Unity must have just a quick way screen. Okay, it's part of Unity Engine. So you can say Unity Engine.screen capture, and then say capture screenshot of what you're currently looking at, and then pass in the location where you want to store it. So get path where we're currently where the project is. Cool. Real quick, when you see this type stuff, these are like I don't know if they're called the same as macros, because I was saying that these with the square brackets are macros. You send these commands out, like these are tooltips that'll be displayed in the inspector. But you can basically say these are commands like, hey, if we're not in the Unity editor, then we can run this code. Else, we can run this code, and then you say end if. So it's like saying the compiler is checking for you. It's like saying, are we in the Unity editor or not? So this feature is available only in the editor. Okay, so we're not allowed to show the screenshot panel if this gets built and in the exe and someone plays outside Unity. This doesn't get shown because you can't take screenshots outside Unity editor. Cool. I have to remember if that's called macro or not. All right. So I just wanted to look into the HUD, to the UI elements. While we're talking about UI, I'm going to have like 10 minutes. Let me show you what World Space UI is. So that was kind of like how, I mean, this is like an overview of the HUD, because there's a lot going on. Usually the UI is like really, it's the reason that it's up in the game manager is because the UI needs to be like made aware of everything that's happening in the game. So it's kind of closely tied to the higher level stuff, to the game manager stuff. So that's why the game HUD is up here. But since we're just having a conversation on UI, let me show you this enemy hoverbot. So it's this prefab. Let's see, it's got an enemy controller, which is a lot of stuff is exposed publicly on it. It looks like you tweak a lot on the enemy controller. It's enemy mobile, so this enemy can move. So it's got a different script. It's got some health. Now, world space health bar. All right. It's also got a nav mesh agent for how to navigate around. We'll have to look at that. I don't really use it that much, so I have to see if I can read up on that. But it's not like those waypoints, those pathfinding that was done in the 2D game. So this is like baking the geometry down, and it's kind of like how you have physics meshes, but it's like this. It's actually this light blue thing right here. The nav mesh was baked out. It's saying, okay, here's all this light blue area. This is kind of like movable, like space that the enemies can move in. In either case, there's this actor script, a compass element. So I guess this is how it gets put onto the HUD compass. And it's an audio source. That's it. So let's look at World Space Health Bar. It looks like it has a lot of colliders and stuff. I'm going to turn off all these gizmos so it's easier to see. So we have the 3D model, and up above here is a 2D element. So a 2D element looks weird in 3D space because you're not used to like viewing it from different angles. And 2D element doesn't make sense really to be viewable at different angles. So when you have a world space UI, usually it's going to be pivoted. It's going to be rotated like toward the camera, toward the main camera, so that you always see it directly on, and it makes more sense to see a 2D element directly on like that. So here's the health bar. So if I turn it on and off, yeah. So it's called a pivot because basically it's going to rotate. It's going to always be looking at where the player is. It's always going to rotate at you, so it always looks nice and flat. So if I click play real quick before I dive in more. So I guess you have to shoot. Okay, when you shoot it, it pops up. But notice however I'm looking at it, it's right on me. So it looks like it doesn't appear until it takes damage. And then you notice it's like always dead on with you. So we have this parent group that looks like we can rotate the 2D element. And then we have a canvas. So this is a traditional UI element. Notice canvas, world render mode in world space. So here's an example of world space. And it looks like it's just the black image and then the fill bar. So let me see how there must be stretching it. Oh yeah. So this is, it looks like they're just messing with this number. So boom, boom, he's getting hit. They're just figuring out what numbers to move this on. So it's just set up nicely where we just have to mess around with one number. Cool. So if we go back to enemy hoverbot, and we have world space health bar. First off, it needs to know about the health script. So the health script down here, how much health does it have? It needs to know about the health bar image fill. So this is probably how we're messing around with this left stretch. And it needs to know about that pivot, as I showed you, and hide full health bar. So if I turn this off, you would see the health bar without, even if he wasn't hit. So this is what I just talked about. Health bar image, health bar pivot, hide full health bar. So we just have an update method here. Interesting. So the image fill amount is just going to equal the current health divided by max health. And this is coming from the health script. So I wonder if the health script is very similar to the health script of last one. So no. Oh, cool. Unity actions. We'll have to cover those. On damage. So Unity actions are events. So this will be very similar to like the UI events. So when he's on damaged, it says, oh, there's an action, an event. This enemy was damaged. Who needs to be known about this? Who is subscribing to this Unity action? And then they'll get their method called. And then on healed, so whenever this aid, so this could be like a player enemy, but whenever they're healed, on healed will get called, and on die. And we'll cover what these generics are, this that's being passed out. Anyway, current health, are you invincible? Can pick up, I guess like if you go over a pickup, saying is your current health less than max health? Can you pick up like a health pickup? And so if you have full health, you don't pick up a health pickup because it's just a waste. Get ratio of current health over max health is critical, is the get ratio is this less than the critical health ratio, which is 0.3. Sure. Are you dead? Okay, so on start, set your current health. It's not the it's a little different, a little bit more advanced than the 2D one. So we have a heal, we have a take damage. These are all public. Kill, handle death. So nice. What I like is that we have a lot of invokes which deal with these Unity actions. So invoking an event and subscribing to event. And so that's kind of the correct way to use events, as opposed to like the 2D game where the guy had that developer had that kind of I forgot what they called it, but they basically had this little event handler that he built himself. And I was saying this is getting a little too complicated. That's supposed to be abstracted away. You're supposed to use the Unity event system, these Unity actions, and we're gonna invoke events, much like a button click, like a UI with the event system. Cool. So anyway, my real place was okay. Take health, current health divided by health max health, which that's fine to do. Take this property divided by that property, but they made a like kind of a helper method to do that already, like the get ratio here. Like you could just call that and it does the same thing. So it's kind of weird that they didn't take advantage of it. But anyway, the fill amount on the image will be whatever that ratio is. It's going to be between 0 and 1, 0 and 100%. So the fill amount. So health bar image. It is an image. Okay, it's an image. So it's reference. Oh, it's this right here. Okay, I was looking at like the kind of the brute method way. Like let's mess with the rect transform itself. So they're not even. Oh, that's cool. So the image has this fill amount, and we're filling horizontal right to left. We could go other ways, but nice. You go left to right. You can go right to left. You can go up and down. Oh, very good. Radial, which doesn't that doesn't make much sense, but in a circle. Cool. So let's go back to horizontal right. So he's just messing with this value from 1 to 0, which is very common to redo the math. So you can just get a nice, easy 1 to 0. It looks really good. Then here we go. Health bar pivot. Look at the main camera's position. So look at. So this is a method on the transform. So health bar pivot is just taking the transform component at the root. So at this parent level, so everything underneath this will rotate with it because they're in local space. And so look at is a nice method sitting on the transform component. We don't have to get into the quaternions and 3D rotations, which are very hairy, but I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, there's quite a bit of code in dealing with this. But nicely, it like abstracts away all the 3D math rotation scariness and just say, okay, this transform, look at, rotate itself so it's looking directly at, and okay, what do we want to look at? Go get the main camera, go get its transform component, and go get its world position, and look at that. And so, luckily, the main camera is sitting on the player. So he's going to look over here. The main player doesn't have any geo because you don't see anything. I thought maybe there'd be like a little hand or something, but you don't see the main player at all. But I'm guessing when he gets a gun, you would see like the gun model sitting in front of the camera. Anyway, the enemy is going to look at the player or the health bar pivot so that it's full. You know, the 2D graphic appears full in nature. And then if we're hiding full health bar, then we're going to take the game object. So the pivot this health bar pivot is pointing at the transform component. Just go up a level to the game object. So at this entire level here, and just when you turn the whole thing off, it goes through all the children and turns them off as well. And it says set active, so true or false. So they're doing a little logical condition. They're not right within the input parameter. So this is being evaluated. So health bar image dot fill amount. So if it's not equal to 1, so 1 means it's full. So let's just say it is. Let's just say it is 1. Like it's fully filled at the moment. It says is 1 not equal to 1. That's a false statement. This would evaluate to false, and so we would turn the game object off. If it was any other number, for example, he did get hit. Let's say the fill amount got updated to 0.85. And this would say is 0.85 not equal to 1, and that evaluates to true, and we would turn it on. I feel like in just the health, to make it a little bit more clear, I would go to the health script and just have like is full. Just have like another method that just is full and return if it's 1 over 1 or not, so that it's a little bit clearer to code to read. But anyway, that is a world space UI. That's how the health bar is functioning over the enemy robot. Cool. So in this class, we just spent our time on UIs. We looked at the intro menu, the win scene, and lose scene, all of which is just heavy screen space UI. It's actually all the same UI, just tweaked a little bit. And then we went to main scene, and we kind of looked at all these game objects, like the organization of it at a high level. And then we kind of dove into the game HUD. So we stuck with the UI to look at screen space, and then we looked at this enemy hoverbot, how it's got a world space UI, the health bar above it. All right, let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you on Friday.